Hey, welcome to A Lose Carry. I'm your host, Phoenix Trinidad. If you're new here, this is Zero Tackle's weekly NRL podcast where we talk about everything to do with the NRL and Origin. And speaking of Origin, Mitch Barnett has gone down injured. What does that mean for New South Wales? On the Queensland side of things, what changes do we need to make for Game 2? Lee Addison, rugby league coach, absolutely goes to town on Billy Slater. Also, Payne Haas, his contract news has kicked off over the weekend, so we talk about that. It's a massive episode. Let's get into it. All right, and joining us, as always, the usual crew of misfits this week. Darren Parkin, Zero Tackle analyst first up. How are you, mate?
Going very well. Yeah, another interesting week, and obviously dissecting last Wednesday. Keen to get Lee's thoughts and Scott's on what was a pretty disappointing performance from the Banana Benders.
Absolutely. You've got to let me introduce them first. So, as you said, we have Lee Addison, rugby league coach. How are you, buddy?
I'm fine, thank you. I agree with Darren. I've only just woken up, I think, from being sent to sleep in that second half. It was a knock-on-a-thon.
Absolutely. And the man that keeps zerotackle.com running, editor Scott Pryde. How are you, buddy?
Yeah, well, mate, as Lee and Darren pointed out, pretty ordinary Origin, but you know what, the Dragons won on Friday night, so I'm actually pretty happy.
All right, we'll get into that later on. All right, let's get to the rundown. Okay, first thing on the rundown, not a fun one for me. So Mitch Barnett went down on the weekend in a nice win for the Warriors. Scott, is that an ACL? Is it an MCL? What are we looking at here?
Yeah, it's not a nice one for the Warriors, not a nice one for the Blues. So we're waiting on scan results at the time of filming on Monday morning. We'd expect those to come back in the next 24 to 48 hours, but certainly sounds like it's going to be an ACL. The hands-on test for the ACL is normally pretty accurate, and the talk out of the sheds yesterday was it's an ACL, which will mean he's actually racing the clock for round one next year at this point, which is a really, really big shame for a guy who was playing excellent rugby league.
Yeah, so what does that mean for the Blues? Is that worse for the Blues or is that worse for the Warriors?
It's bad for everybody. It's bad for rugby league. It's bad for the Blues. It's bad for the Warriors. I think the Blues have more options to replace Barnett than the Warriors do. Certainly, you take a player like that out of club level and it creates huge issues. Barnett's influence on the Blues is certainly important, but they'll find a way to replace him, I think.
Yeah, it feels like if New South Wales it feels like if New South Wales get it right once, they obviously overcome that, whereas the Warriors have the ongoing struggle of trying week after week after week to fix that.
Yeah, it's just purely a numbers game, Phoenix, Darren and Scott. It's, a 20, 30-man squad at the Warriors versus 4 million people, I think, in New South Wales and Sydney. So it's a simple numbers game, and I think there are options that can come into the New South Wales side. Obviously, Terrell May was very upset after the last omission. Stefano can also come into things as well. I worry for the Warriors in terms of the pressure this now puts on James Fisher-Harris to dominate the middle of the park, because as much as the game has changed and evolved, you still need to win the middle of the park.
Yeah, I would actually say that the one I want to see come into the Blues side is Keon Koloamatangi. I think he's been in fantastic form for the Rabbitohs. That game he played against the Tigers a couple of weeks ago was off the charts. I think he ran 300 plus metres and he had another 200 plus against the Warriors yesterday. Played all 80 minutes in that game, tackled well. So I think he's the guy that's got to come in if they're not going to pick Terrell May. And May's form the last couple of weeks seems to be on a bit of a roller coaster, and the way he's handled that game one omission, I don't think you can then go and recall him. At club level, Lee, you're right. I don't know how the Warriors handle that. It puts a lot of pressure on Fisher-Harris. If there's any prop in the game who can handle it, it's probably Fisher-Harris. He's a 4-time premiership winner. He's led that Penrith pack for a number of years with wild levels of success. So I don't think that he can't handle it, but I do think that others are going to have to stand up there, whether it's Marata Niokore or Jackson Ford or some of the other young guys coming through. Andrew Webster's going to have to really lean on some of the other players in that side to replace Barnett, because we know the influence he's provided that Warriors side.
On Keon for New South Wales, I think timing of form, but also he's got a lot of prominent people sort of putting that name forward at this time as well. So, I'd be very surprised if he doesn't land there.
Yeah, and speaking of, so in terms of Origin changes, we'll go to the other side. By the way, congratulations, Scott, for the Blues win. We haven't really discussed the actual results of Origin since it happened, but I'll go to Darren. So Queensland, obviously not what they wanted in terms of an Origin output, especially from two of their big names, Cherry Evans and Kalen Ponga, underperforming in that first game. What do we think about their spots?
Yeah, I guess they have less options in that sense. If you break it down, obviously first back-to-back losses at home since 97, factoring in the last game of last season. They scored 38 points in the opening game of Origin last year and have scored 30 in the next three and 12 at home in 2 games in Queensland. So they're clearly struggling to make any inroads or ask any significant questions of New South Wales. They were out of that game very early. Obviously, Dearden was a bit of a shining light and then backed that up with another strong performance at club level during the week. But yeah, it looks like Daly Cherry Evans, oldest Origin player ever, 36. You would think that if he does get omitted, and that's what the Jungle Drums are suggesting, that would be it in terms of that. And then what they do, Lee, in terms of shaking things up, I know you want to unload. You can either do that now or later. It's up to you.
There's only 2 things wrong with Queensland at the moment: their attack and their defence. All the blame goes on DCE, and I've coached for a long time, and I know when a half looks lost. The amount of times that Cameron Munster, Harry Grant turned and looked around with their arms wide as if to say, what's happening now? That happened several times. I'll be honest, DCE did look like he froze in that game. However, the stats don't lie either. A lot of this has to come back to Billy Slater. Their timing was off in attack. Their attack was very readable. So they were taking carries in the direction of where they were then trying to pass the ball sideways. So they were actually telegraphing things to the New South Wales defence. There's another famous tenet of rugby league as well. If you want to go sideways, you have to go forward first. You have to get the defence going backwards. Queensland were just far too lateral. New South Wales could have defended that all day. In terms of defence, the overwhelming thing that the commentators spoke after the game, they said New South Wales rolled through the Queensland pack. But there's 2 sides to that too. There's what New South Wales did in attack, but there's also what Queensland did in defence. I'm going to drop an article with you this week, Scott, to put onto Zero Tackle, and it will be resplendent with a YouTube video where I have some screenshots of tackle techniques. The Queensland tackle techniques were designed to catch the New South Wales players, to catch them, to wrestle with them, and control the ruck that way. The problem with doing that, all the teams come from different clubs and have slightly different systems. So to come up with quite an intricate defensive system that requires specialist activity is quite a challenge in a rep environment. New South Wales actually tackled first. They put their shoulders in and dominated Queensland physically. Queensland were trying to catch them and wrestle with them, and this was manna from heaven for the likes of Payne Haas, who just brushed them off by going forward. New South Wales focused on going forward and keeping it simple. Queensland tried to play them their way out of trouble. Billy got his tactics completely, hideously wrong. You will hear more from me this week on that. Scott, are you a Queensland fan or a New South Wales fan?
I am a New South Wales fan.
There you go.
Born here, and I will never support Queensland ever. But Queensland were woeful. I think a lot of the points you just made, Lee, are right, although I didn't have the words to describe them the way you just did. I suppose the benefits of being a rugby league coach. But yeah, for me, it'd be a big call to drop your captain mid-series, wouldn't it? But I'm not sure Queensland have another option because as you quite rightly pointed out, Darren, they've scored 30 points in their last 3 Origins. But I think the stat was something like 7 or 8 of their last 10 Origin tries have come against 12 men. They just can't find a way to breach the New South Wales defensive line. And And unfortunately, a lot of that falls on your halfback. Yes, there are other issues in the Queensland team, and I think, if Corey Horsburgh doesn't play game 2, I give it away. Like, seriously, it's just one of the most baffling decisions ever for him to miss game 1. I was sitting there watching game 1, and the thought I kept having during the first 15 minutes was, oh, thank God Corey Horsburgh's not about to come off the bench, He's just another level. Cherry Evans, yeah, look, Tom Dearden's banging down the door. Whether you pick him or not, I don't know if it's actually going to change all that much.
The Canberra half, Scott, as well.
Yeah, Jamal Fogarty's another one, although he picked up an injury over the weekend and didn't play yesterday for Canberra, so that's another problem. And Kalen Ponga, look, I didn't have him in my game 1 side, so I think where I sit on Kalen Ponga. I think Hamiso Tabuai-Fidow, as poor as he was in the centres, needs to be the fullback, but it probably won't happen.
He needs to do something.
Yeah. I was going to say, looking at Cherry Evans, do they look at him and say it's a purely origin-based decision, or would they take Scott any stock out of the fact that he went back to Clubland and dominated and sort of said, hey, I can still play? Or would they have based the decision purely off that structure and that audition wouldn't matter too much for someone of his experience?
Yeah, I think you've got to base it off origin, whatever decision they make. He hasn't played well in any of his last couple of origins, really, if you date it back to last year. But more concerningly for me, his club form up until Saturday night has been quite poor ever since he said he was going to leave Manly. They had that one game after the decision became public where they played really well, Manly, and Cherry Evans was excellent. And since then, I'm not sure he's had a good game. So
after losing last year, there was a case to clean the decks out before game 1. So there potentially was before game 1. There now definitely is, in my opinion.
Well, this sort of ties into nicely for our next thing. So I'll throw to you for this one, Scott, and then I know Lee has some pretty strong feelings on this next topic. But the origin period itself. So we've talked about what the effect the origin period has on the regular, Clubland series, season. So, and then Wayne Bennett on the weekend came out after that loss to the Warriors. And what did he say, Scott?
Yeah, it was actually before the weekend, but he basically said that it's time for the clubs to put the foot down and say that Origin needs to be played over a 3-week period. You can still have it on your Wednesdays and whatever else. But one of the comments Bennett made that I found probably most fascinating was the best Origin period he's ever coached, and he's coached some Origin periods for Queensland, was the one in 2020 where all 3 games were played at the end of the season after the coronavirus pandemic, and it sort of shut the season down. The NRL had to get very creative about how to keep Origin as a product. And so they played it on 3 Wednesday nights at the end of the season, back to back to back, and the players are in camp and they didn't leave camp and go back to Clubland. Apparently the players loved it, the coaches loved it, and it had no impact on the regular season. So Bennett's comments I found quite interesting, and I do think it's time for a change. There is no other sporting competition anywhere in the world that goes, oh, we're going to have a 6-week break now, or period now, where every second week you're going to be playing with either players backing up off a 48-hour rest, or you're going to be backing up by playing without those players who are away in Origin camp. So I think one way or another, we've got a new TV deal starting in, I think, 2028 or 2027, whatever it is. It's being negotiated at the moment. And if one of the things they aren't negotiating is the Origin period needs to be separated from the NRL season, it just doesn't make any sense to me. But as Phoenix said, Lee, if you've got some thoughts here, so I'm going to let you read it.
I've developed some significant ideas over the years on my social media channels. I think there's room, because we've also got to consider the international game. The Ashes series has been reignited at the end of this year, and that will get tongues wagging again. So if we're going towards 20 teams in the NRL, there's all sorts of options to play around with the draw. But I totally agree with the concept of Wayne Bennett saying it ruins clubs' premiership chances. It turns into a reserve grade comp for 2 months, basically. Strangely, in this context of quite a lot of NRL players backed up this weekend. But then they're going to go back to the RLPA and complain about their workloads later in the year, right? So we can't have it both ways. I would like to see a 4-week gap with Origin in there. We can also add the international games as well that don't involve Australia. So there's plenty of teams now. Tonga, Samoa, England, New Zealand can all play against each other. And what's happened to Rugby League Nines? Where has that disappeared to? We can have a Nines competition. We could have a knockout competition. I think it's time to think laterally, because these players are being put through a threshing machine every single week as it is, and then we make it twice as bad during the Origin period, because even though the game was atrocious in the second half, really, it was still entertaining and it was still intense. The intensity of the game is huge, and the players are absolutely busted after it. So something has got to happen, and I'm glad Wayne Bennett has spoken up.
Just a counterpoint to all of that, I do actually like the idea of shutting down the comp for Origin specifically, but you could look at it in the same way that you look at, say, the English Premier League, where part of the job is you have your cup games as well. You have you're playing the FA Cup as well as the regular Premier League season, as well as the Europa or whatever. Which they're not, but then the other counterpoint to that is a guy like Ange Postecoglou, who I will always take the opportunity to mention. He won the Europa Cup, but he had to sacrifice the regular Premier League season, which was awful, and then he might be facing the sack. So you could argue that the Origin period being in the middle of the season is just part of coaching in the NRL.
I guess it's competing interests too, in the sense that obviously in English football, it's your same club playing in those competitions, where let's say it's Liverpool trying to win the Champions League, trying to win the Premier League, the FA Cup and the Carabao or whatever it's called these days. Whereas obviously Queensland and the Broncos, or Queensland and Manly, might have competing interests and sit there and say, look, we want this person available, and you're sitting there, well, this disrupts our season, and you've got to sort of factor it in with all of that. So, yeah, it's an interesting one. I do like that notion that it's a marathon season and you've got to balance the challenges, but I guess the challenges are often faced by a different group. So, yeah, it's an interesting one.
Yeah, and let's not forget that Penrith also won 4 in a row while half their team were playing Origin as well. So, it could just be cranky old Wayne Bennett. We'll move on to the next thing. So, Scott, you have the floor for this one. Congratulations, Dragons 20 over the Knights 6. It's not often, as you said, that you get to come on this show and celebrate a Dragons win.
Yeah, I did say that off there. Thanks for bringing that on air, Phoenix, and reminding me of how terrible my club have generally been over all these years. But yeah, no, great performance by the Dragons on Thursday night. I thought they were excellent. Actually, Newcastle very, very poor, but the Dragons needed to make a bit of a statement, and they did, particularly in the first half. I thought the youth is the way to go for the Dragons moving forward. Yes, they've got some experienced players brought in, and Val Holmes and Clint Gufferson and Damien Cook have all been pretty good throughout the first half of this year. But this is a real rebuilding year for mine at St George Illawarra. Like King Togi has come into the halves now. Obviously, Dylan Egan was there before he did his ACL, but we've seen the debut of Loco Pacifica Tonga in the last couple of weeks, and obviously Hamish Stewart's playing quite well as well in the middle third. So I thought it was a real positive sign to see those young players back up off the bye and back up off the win against Brisbane before that, to then come out and beat Newcastle. I thought they played well at home, and the next couple of weeks are going to be really interesting now, just to see if the Dragons can actually get a bit of a roll on, because if you look at St George Illawarra's season so far, they've had 3 losses by a single point, and 2 of those arguably they should have won. You win those 2 games and they're in the top 4. So it's very close to being a very different story for the Dragons.
That was to be my question, Scott, that, yeah, they're in the 8 and they've lost 3 tight games, or they were right in it. What do you think their ceiling actually is? As you say, a few things changed their top 4, but what can they do?
Well, I think finding a ceiling for any team this year is quite difficult, because the comp is so wide open and so tight. There's not much in it. Between probably about 12 or 13 teams there fighting for the top 8. So, what is the Dragons' ceiling based on the way they've played? Yeah, they could be. They certainly should be a top 8 side at their ceiling, but at their floor, like so many sides, you could be in the bottom 4. So, it's all about finding some consistency over the second half of the season, I think.
There was an Elvis impersonator before the game, Scott. Did you see that?
I actually didn't, Lee. I missed kickoff, but.
And it's fair to say Newcastle were all shook up. In terms of Adam O'Brien, I think they need to return him to sender. Yeah. The club needs a little less conversation and a bit more action.
How many of these do you have?
I'm just thinking about them now. I'm just thinking the fans feel he's the devil in disguise, and there's too many suspicious minds about why he rested Ponga.
Live in the ghetto.
Yeah. Why did he rest Ponga? Everyone else played. Why did Ponga rest? And and I know you're going to fire up about this, Scott, there's a player called Jackson Hastings who still sits in reserve grade. This team cannot score a try. They scored one try in that game. They cannot attack. Yet $700,000 worth of talent is sat in reserve grade.
Yeah, but Jackson Hastings isn't worth $700,000, is he? To me, the Jackson Hastings conundrum, and I've been wanting to get on the show and talk about this for a little while because it's come up a few times and I haven't been on every week. We've talked about it, but if Jackson Hastings is the answer, then we're asking the wrong question, because to me, he's and I'll probably get slammed for saying this, but to me, he's actually a bit of a ball hog. The stats a couple of years ago when I think his last year at the Tigers or even his first year at Newcastle, he touched the ball something like 30 more times a game than Nathan Cleary, and that's never going to work. But also, the year that Newcastle made the finals, I think it was 2023 when Adam Clune was still at the club. Hastings got so much credit for that run to the finals, but he was injured for most of it, and then he came back and they got knocked out. I just don't see it. I don't think Jackson Hastings fixes the club in any way, shape or form. And the contract is one of the most baffling I've ever seen signed.
People are genuinely confused as to why Adam Bryan is still the coach of that team.
I am.
The rugby league chat is... It's almost like people laugh when you talk about the Knights. You know when you get past the point of caring as a fan, and if you don't smile, you cry. That's what's going on with Newcastle at the moment. And I listen to Joey every week, and he is just sinking when he talks about the Knights. And Sowie said it last week on the podcast too. He said they will not beat the Dragons. That tells you all you need to know.
Yep. Absolutely. So moving now to the next game. So Darren, your fellas, the Storm, a nice win away against the Titans, 28-16. What did you make of that one?
They were a bit patchy. They made a few mistakes. Craig Bellamy at times was visibly frustrated. Obviously comes with all of the talk around his future, Lee, which we kind of mentioned a little bit last week. So it looks like 2026 in the can, and then we'll see from there. But yeah, look, they haven't been at their best every week, but they're still top four. They've been top four the whole way through the campaign. A tricky win for them away during the Origin period, but against not the greatest opposition, it's fair to say. So what do you make of that call in regards to his future? They keep on keeping on, even if they're a little bit short of peak performance.
Yeah, they need to get that sorted. I don't think it helps. They're not a usual mentally tough and physically tough football team yet this season that we associate with Melbourne Storm. Now, as the years go on in the NRL, there becomes even more thought that you can't maintain a certain intensity throughout the season and you have to time it right. So maybe they change something in pre-season this year and they're just lacking that little bit of an edge, because after the grand final last year, I really expected this team to kick on. But I do think that the circumstances around the NRL have changed. I think it's so physically demanding now. Linking our subjects a little bit, I wrote that there was over 100 players out of the NRL last week during Origin. News Corp reckon it was over 200. So, and that is because of the intensity of the NRL and the intensity of training that's going into it. So linking that back to the Storm, I feel they might have done something slightly different in the pre-season, trying to build up incrementally. And I just sense that frustration with Craig Bellamy because he's not got his team humming like he wants them to.
Yeah, I think Melbourne will be fine. I think you might have made a point there about them probably balancing the season a bit better, and I think that's probably a part of it. They'll get through the Origin period, and then I'm sure they'll be fine heading into the finals. I think the bigger concern coming out of that game is the Titans and Des Hasler. They're a wooden spoon favourite now, aren't they? Them and the Knights, it's going to be one of those two. But the talk out of the media overnight, well, yesterday, was that Brad Arthur's actually been actively shopped to the Titans at this point. Des is a dead man walking, isn't he? Like that, he's been there for 18 months and they've achieved nothing.
And since we last mentioned it on this podcast, it's also been revealed that there are clauses in his contract. So they're not going to get into the 8 this year. I have no doubt it costs a lot of money. As I have said recently on this podcast too, there are strong rumours coming out of the Titans that there are some players that really don't respond to Desi's style of coaching. It's quite interesting, isn't it? All the teams that seem to have these leaks and complain. about the style of coaching are the ones at the bottom of the ladder. So, which is interesting, going back to the Knights, nobody seems to complain about Adam O'Brien. So, but yeah, the Titans, talking of inconsistency, we said that Melbourne Storm are a bit inconsistent and not at the same intensity. Titans are inconsistent in the same game. They'll play one set like world beaters, the next set they'll look like a Queensland Cup side. They are so up and down, like a yo-yo, it is not funny. So Des is the latest coach to fail. I mean, they're at the bottom of the ladder. They're not doing well. So they either back Des or they sack him.
Yep. All right, moving on to the next game. So Cowboys getting over the Tigers. They looked all right, but then there was a little bit of a comeback, Scott. Was that a little bit of a cause for concern for the Cowboys?
Yeah, possibly. I mean, the Tigers scored 3 tries in about 5 minutes there at one point, and then the fourth about 5 minutes from full time and just couldn't get over the line. The Cowboys scored most of their points against 12 men, which I think is another issue in itself for Todd Payton and his side. But to drop off at the end of the game like that, yeah, I mean, you've got to play 80 minutes in the NRL. Doesn't matter how far you're in front. It would have been a record for the biggest comeback in NRL history if the Tigers had got up. They were down 26 points. But I think the counterpoint to that is that the Cowboys had all of their Origin players backing up, and so fatigue may well have set in at the back end of that game there, and it certainly looked that way. But at the same time, 3 tries in 5 minutes, fatigue's not really the answer for that, I don't think, Lee.
We also, I've done this a couple of times already in this podcast, referred it back to the coach, and I pick up patterns in games, and you don't have to be Sherlock Holmes to work out that defensively the Cowboys do drop off in games. Linking it back to my Queensland analysis from Wednesday, 2 of the worst defenders were Ruben Cotter and Jeremiah Nanai. They look like they have never tackled before. That's how bad it was. I've got screenshots to prove this. So I'm asking the question, how does Payton teach defence at the Cowboys? I've seen some of the tries they conceded. Some of the defensive decisions were really poor, particularly on the edges, but their actual tackle techniques across the board. So I put this back on the coach.
Yeah, it's looking at the numbers on it too. So from a Cowboys point of view, to highlight that, 3 of their last 4 games, they've both had and conceded 20-point run-ons. Obviously, the Magic Round game against the Warriors, where they got beaten 30-26, where they came flying home, almost hit the front with a disallowed try late in the piece. They had the Panthers draw at 30 apiece, which was a wildly swinging game, and now obviously this one where they were dominating and almost let it slip. So there is that tendency, going back to that phrase, Lee, about the inconsistency within games, that they've looked outstanding and then stopped, or been very ordinary and then caught fire. So they're bouncing up and down, the Cowboys at present.
And if you look at their recent history over the years, they bounce up and down the ladder too. Yeah. So they had one great year, didn't they? And the word was that the pre-season was quite significant that year. Since then, they've been very, very, very hard to pick. And gone is the time when Townsville used to be a guaranteed 2 points for them. As the years go on, teams are getting more and more experienced about going up to Suncorp and going up to Townsville. And it's just not as daunting anymore. For the Tigers, to go up there and score 28 points also shows that they're fighting for Benji too. I've never doubted that the players play for Benji, the Tigers, so they can take plenty away from that game too, Phoenix.
Hey, sticking with you, Lee, as we move on to our next game, I know you love talking about the Broncos, so what did you make of that performance on the weekend? That's 4 straight losses in a row now. I think they're sitting 11th or 12th on the ladder, 11th on the ladder, putting up 6 points against the Sea Eagles, who managed 34.
I think you named this podcast, because you changed the name of the podcast, didn't you, this year? I think you named this podcast Loose Carry off the Broncos, because they don't build pressure. They have no discipline in general. Their defence is just non-existent at times, and the defensive reads are really poor. Also, they're not playing for each other. They're not working for each other. One of the journalists, prominent journalists up there, said they should hang their heads in shame and apologise to their public. It was that bad. The thing that stuck out to me, Payne Haas, who after an uncharacteristically poor start was fantastic, and we know Payne Haas has had his moments where he's wanted to leave the club, etc. He makes a big break. Now, I think if you're going to support one prop, it would be Payne Haas. If you're going to follow one prop who might offload, it would be Payne Haas, right? He makes a big break, and there was no Broncos player in sight. It was all Manly players in the screen. That is a metaphor for what is going on at the Broncos. So, again, similar situation to Des Hasler at the Titans, except Des has had nearly 2 years. They brought Madge in to change the culture of this club. I also believe, Scott, that he moved his post-match dressing down to avoid the cameras. So he probably gave them a big spray.
Yeah, I would imagine he would have, and if I was Michael Maguire, I would have given them a spray too, because they were awful. Their effort, as you just pointed out, was poor, and they don't look like a team who want to play with each other or play for Michael Maguire at the moment. How Payne Haas is among your best players after he's played Origin 4 days ago and didn't train for the 10 days before that because he had a quad tear, that sums it up to me. You listen pre-game to Payne Haas, and he was talking about the move of Jesse Arthurs to fullback was done to improve their defence, to improve their defensive line, and we all know how important the fullback is in setting that. Well, it was worse. Do they need Reece Walsh back? Yeah, probably, but I'm not sure he fixes all that much given the way he was playing the first half of the year. He was solid, but too much rocks and diamonds, a lot of errors, and it probably sums up the way Brisbane are playing. I'm actually, as much as I think Michael Maguire was brought in for all the right reasons, I'm not sure he's the coach for that squad at the moment. I don't know that his mentality is going to change some of those players. I think there's too much flash and not enough effort at times for Brisbane, and I just don't know that any coach can fix that. I think Brisbane need a bit of a squad clean out, if I'm being perfectly honest. A couple of the guys they have on that, that more flashy side, fine, but there's just too many of them, and it's not going to work.
Yeah, I think last year, obviously rattled by the grand final the year before, they just below the surface, there was that fragility where they could look good if it was all on their own terms, but it didn't take much to sort of scratch down and get that, I guess, that inconsistency in them. And this year it's probably been the same. I reckon they had too many of those flashy type players that thought last year was a bit of an aberration. We've got that out of our system, we'll be fine. And then all of a sudden a bit of heat came on them, and the same problems were there again, where there's just a little bit too much fragility and not enough, I guess, players prepared to grab it and say, yeah, I'm not going to accept that. And it's just been a little bit too easy to play against them sometimes.
Yeah, it's look, it's dire straits at the moment, but we're going to change the tone here and go to the Raiders, who just got over the Roosters by 2 points, Darren. So they're looking like a genuine premiership chance at the moment. So sitting second on the ladder at the start of the season, if you would have said Raiders are going to be second on the ladder at this point, you'd take that.
Yeah, 1-8 of their last 9. I think the loss, they were up by about 20 against the Dogs. So they had their moments in that, beating the Storm in Golden Point through that run. This was another tough win on the road. They're 3/4 of the way to their win tally, I think, from last year. I think they finished second in 2016, which was their best recent run. Last time they were minor premier was 1990 or thereabouts. So they're really shaping things up to have a legitimate crack at it. And the theme has been that the season's fairly open. And it could certainly be the year for the Green Army, the way they're tracking at the moment.
They keep answering questions. They get asked questions, they keep answering them. They're really working hard for each other. They're in second in the ladder for a reason. Things weren't going for them in a lot of that game, yet they fought on, got back into it, and kicked on and won. And the other interesting thing for me is Jamal Fogarty pulled out before the game. There was 2 halves in that side, both called Ethan, funnily enough. I'd love to know if that has ever happened before. And they're both 20 and 21. They're babies. and they beat a team chock full of stars in the Sydney Roosters. And I think it's just yet another, just like the win at the Warriors, just like the way they bounced back from being in Las Vegas, just like the way they went and travelled everywhere around the country for a while. They keep answering the questions. They are a genuine premiership threat this year, Scott.
Absolutely, they are. And their draw on the run home now is, they're over the hard part of their draw. They've played a lot of their away games. I think they only leave Canberra about 3 or 4 more times this year. And so they're certainly really in the shot of finishing in the top 4, getting that double chance and going on to be a real contender for the premiership. As you rightly, they keep answering all the questions. Their defensive work has been outstanding, and that's the only reason they won last night's game, because it was a bit of a car crash, that game of footy. Neither team played all that well, I thought. A lot of drop ball, a lot of stoppages. It wasn't the best game. I think what that game did prove, though, is that for Canberra to be a genuine premiership contender, they're going to need Jamal Fogarty fit. He has been sensational for Canberra, and I don't think there's any surprise that when he got injured last year, they fell down the table like a stone off a cliff. If Fogarty's fit, they're a chance. If not, absolutely not. And his move to Manly next year, I think we've just all seen that why Canberra are probably trying to replace him with an experienced half for the next year or two, because the combination of Ethan Strange and Ethan Sanders isn't quite ready to go yet.
Yeah, well, we'll stick with the more positive news. So someone that needs a shout out, Lee. So Alex Johnston, 200 tries, 30 years old. What did you make of that? Is he the NRL's best winger?
I like that question, because there's different things that people look for in wings now. So if you look at the Roosters, for example, they have 2 wings the size of skyscrapers in Manhattan, and they're good at returning the football from kick returns. So an awful lot of possession comes from kick returns, over 80% in a game, because completion rates are quite high in the NRL. And statistically, most important is tackle 2. So if your wings and fullback return the ball really well and get go forward, statistically that means your set has more chance of getting go forward. So there's that type of wing. But since 1908 in Australia, we've always associated wings with scoring tries and finishing things off. And for this player to score so many tries shows he's an excellent finisher, shows that when he gets opportunities, he doesn't waste them. It shows he can catch high balls. It shows he can work in small spaces. To say, is he the best winger? I think that, put it this way, I think he is the most underrated one that's excellent. And he hasn't had lots and lots of rep opportunities. And I think that's because of what I said about the back of the field when you're returning the ball. I think coaches tend to lean on that a little bit too much at times, because at the end of the day, the game is about scoring more points than the opposition, Darren, and this fella puts the ball over the line.
That's exactly right. I mean, the aim of the game, depending on which way you look at it, is to, score more than the opposition. That's how you win, and you need those weapons that can get it done, and few have been a better weapon historically and consistently over the journey. So, yeah, a tremendous credit for that level of longevity.
Yeah, first up, amazing effort to score 200 NRL tries. It's never happened in the NRL era, and he's gonna catch Ken Irvine pretty soon. He's only 12 or 13 tries away from that now, so amazing effort. But you're right, Lee. I think in terms of a well-rounded winger, I think you do need to be able to carry it from the back. And Johnston, he's solid, but he's certainly not your Daniel Tupou or Brian To'o. If you look at Penrith's 4 premierships in a row, they've built that off their back 5 being in the top 10 or 20 for run meters every single year during that run. So I don't know that you can call Johnston the best winger. He's certainly the best finisher. He's an incredible finisher out wide. But is he the best overall winger? Probably not, but he's certainly in the conversation.
Yeah, well, congratulations to him anyway, even if you're not the best winger in the NRL, 200 tries. It was a beautiful moment, so some tears after the game, I'm pretty sure. So moving on, Scott, to some contract news. So Payne Haas, this has kicked off in the last over the last weekend. So fill us in on this one.
Yeah, it's been one hell of a weekend because James Hipper came out Saturday night and said Payne Haas's management has emailed every club in the NRL to gauge interest in Haas for 2027 and beyond. We know the Perth Bears are coming into the comp in 2027, and so they'll make a play, and certainly, every club would make a play for Payne Haas. He'd be pretty stupid not to. There's only about 3 props that are anywhere near his level, being Joe Tarpany, James Fisher-Harris, and Adam Fanua-Blake. They're your 4, and then it's daylight to the rest. So every club would be pretty stupid not to. But after that, Payne Haas's managers come out and said, well, it was just regularly scheduled emails that go out to every club every month to say, these are our players that are coming off contract. But interestingly, one of our writers at Zero Tackle, Isaac Issa, made an Instagram post on the original story about Payne Haas potentially leaving the Broncos and all the rest of it. And Payne Haas's brother, Cleese, has come out and liked it. So read into that what you will. It might have been an innocent like, but there might be more to it. The big thing for Payne Haas for me, sorry, Lee, I can see you're itching to talk. I'll get to you in a second. But the big thing for me is Payne Haas, when he requested a release from Brisbane last time before re-signing, he wants to play for a winner. And at the moment, Brisbane don't really look like a winner.
This happens every year, Phoenix. The Payne Haas contract saga every year. It was about a year ago he was getting booed by his own crowd because he said he wanted to leave, or was that 2 years ago?
2 years, but yeah.
Yeah. So this is Groundhog Day. And look, he can name 16 other suitors that people would move the debt. I actually genuinely think he is transcending the role of prop. I do think we'll be talking about Payne Haas as the best prop that ever played the game towards the end of his career. I also think that the world is his oyster in terms of, I think he could go and play in the NFL too, if he wanted to. So I just think this is part of the management circus. Every year, put it in your diary. Payne Haas will talk about his contract, which must be a pain in the Haas, Darren, for their fans.
Yeah,
Mate.
Lost it.
The amount of puns that Lee has just thrown out. Is this a new skill that we didn't know that you had, mate?
Good chat, Darren. Well done. Thank you.
Sorry, you go, Darren.
I don't know where to necessarily take it from that. I echo all of that. Certainly echo all of that sentiment around, the future. You link it to the salary cap squeeze, which we've spoken about repeatedly, and where that all ends up, and yeah, the fact that every single club's being contacted is a very serious indication, I think, of where it's at. So yeah, it's going to be a curious watch, but something's going to happen at that club. I think it's very obvious somewhere along the way, that's for sure.
Yep, I want to be surprised to see one of those big contracts coming his way if he were to move. So, also, a shout out to Isaac Issa for getting that exclusive scoop. I love it when we get into the area of who has liked what on Instagram. That's my favorite type of sports journalism story. So, moving now to the mailbag, Zero Tackle on Instagram if you want to submit something to our mailbag. This one comes from Jared Maskell. I'll throw this one to you, Scott, first, and then I know that Lee will have some input on this as well. Jared asks, it's a hard one, but what would be a somewhat likely squad for the Perth Bears? Now, I know we might be here for about 2 hours if we were trying to put a squad together, but what do you reckon, Scott?
Yeah, look, we could actually run a separate video on that another day, Phoenix. That'd be a good one to put on the back burner. But yeah, thanks for your question, Jared. We can't name a squad because we'll be here all month. But if we're going to look at a couple of marquee recruits, well, we just talked about one, Payne Haas. If he's off contract come November 1, he's got to be the first guy they target. And then I think it's about finding a spine. I think Will Kennedy's name will come up a fair bit from Cronulla. He's off contract at the moment, but talk is he probably is either going to re-sign on a really low price 1 year deal or head elsewhere. So he could be well and truly on the market. Lockie Galvin's gone. I think that's a boost for Perth, to be perfectly honest. I don't think he was going to help all that much. Lindsay Smith's the other one. the other name I think could be a goer. He's off contract at the end of 2026 and has been pretty good for Penrith, so he could be another one. I think Perth target heavily.
There's lots of halves and hookers lined up at Brisbane, so there's a gentleman by the name of Blake Moser who should be playing an awful lot more NRL than he's being allowed to at Brisbane, so he will be itching to get somewhere. In terms of squad building, every team sport, and rugby league should be no exception to this, needs a mix of stars. So I think it's a media obsession with the marquee player. The Dolphins have done okay, really, without signing a marquee player. And what you can't ever accuse the Dolphins of lacking fight and grit, because they've got a lot of fight and grit in their side. Look at what's wrong with the Broncos. They're lacking that grunt. They're lacking the people who will just get up and out of the trench and take the team forward and do the stuff that doesn't necessarily get the headlines. So you need a good mix of that, or a lot of that, with some star quality added in, some X factor, if you like. And the other way to look at your squad, and every team that's been successful in sport for more than one season has had a good mix of three distinct groups. At the younger end, it's some youngsters that are fearless and ready to roll. I think Broncos have got that mixed horribly wrong and put too many youngsters in a few years ago. The Dolphins, again, have got an excellent half in Katoa, who's very young and he'll grow with the club. So you need a chunk of those players. At the other end, you need some really experienced heads, and all you do is get some players from the Dragons, because all their players are over 50 years old. So you get some of their players across. So you get some old heads in your side that can calm the team when they concede a try. They can keep the culture on the right path in training, etc. And then you need to get your biggest section needs to be players who are in their peak. So they're the three sections that you build your team with. And I think the media has an obsession with a marquee player. What a marquee player can do. Newcastle Knights have got a marquee player. West Tigers had a marquee player. Right? It's not necessarily the answer, is it? So, and because players sit in dressing rooms and think, why is that guy getting 4 times the money I am? I've heard props do it. In my life in Clubland, I've heard 2 props slag each other off because one of them says he gets paid more than me and I do twice as many hit-ups and twice as many tackles. So these kind of things happen in dressing rooms. So they need to make sure they get the payment structure right too, and make sure that half the salary cap isn't taken up by 2 players.
Yeah, but it's just balance of the list too, as you say, where it's marquee players in the right areas, not top heavy in certain parts, and as you say, spreading that load. We know contracts are so public these days that you run that risk of, you look at Brown and those sorts of things where everybody knows what somebody's on, what they were on, what they are on now, how it compares across the list. But yeah, it's fascinating. So.
Yeah, but I think as well, you do need marquee players just to get a team going, to bring somebody through the gates as well. Like, marquee players are just about as like marketing as much as they are actually, playing. So that's going to be an interesting one. I think at some point, it's a really good idea. Thank you for the question, Jared. I think we will do a whole video at some point on building out that squad for the Perth Bears. So let's move now to the round 14 preview. So we'll go around the table. What games are we looking at? It's going to be a pretty good round. So we'll start with you, Darren.
Yeah, I think it's been mentioned already, Storm Cowboys, but Sharks Warriors on the Saturday, probably one that jumps out. Warriors obviously with the fresh injury hits and how they respond to that. So that'll be the interesting game. And without stealing anybody's thunder, probably Tigers Penrith, Scott, would be interesting to see how the Tigers, who finished with a stack of momentum on the weekend, carry that into a game against a Penrith side that are probably red-hot favourites on reputation more than form.
Yeah, reputation more than form for sure. The thing with the competition being so close is that every game's kind of, you look at it and go, well, that's got major implications. So Tigers, Penrith, Western Sydney Derbies are ones we always sort of want to look at. I actually think the Raiders Rabbitohs on Sunday afternoon is a smoky for a really good game. I think the Rabbitohs get a couple of guys back for that game. They've obviously had major injury issues, so that'll be good. And the Raiders, we know they're in great form. And I've just got to give a shout out to my Dragons because Lee's just rubbed them up with, everyone's over the age of 50, so they'll beat the Dolphins on Friday night. No, they won't.
I want to. A few weeks ago on Zero Tackle, Scott, I sent you a article pertaining to the Dogs and their draw. The headline was "Dogs of Draw."
Yes.
Listen to this. They last played on Thursday, the 22nd of May. We're recording this on the 2nd of June. They had a bye last week. So they played on the Thursday. They don't play until next Monday. That is the longest turnaround in NRL history.
Hey, what are you looking at there? About 17 or 18 days? They're going to kill that.
I lost fingers and toes to count. I gave up. They've got an absolutely fantastic draw there.
Devil's advocate, can the break be too long?
It's time to blend in. It's time to work with Lockie Galvin. It's been perfect. And they're playing the Eels, and sometimes you can get a team from the local pub to beat the Eels, so it's perfect. Absolutely perfect.
All right. Well, as you said, Scott, we might be here for the next hour if we keep going. But great episode. Thank you for watching. If you got this far, it's going to be a long one. Good shout out to Jeremy who's going to edit this episode. So, Darren, thank you for coming on. Scott, what do we have at Zero Tackle?
Yeah, plenty coming up. Obviously, we've got Origin 2 selections at the end of this coming weekend. So we're not actually sure when they're going to be yet because it's a Monday afternoon game. So it might be a late night on Monday for those of us who have to work. But for the rest of you, enjoy your public holiday.
And Lee Addison, fine form as always. I think there was about 6 puns this episode. I'm going to start a counter every week.
Outstanding.
I've got one more.
Go on.
As you know, this is the greatest rugby league coaching book in history right here, but you can also now book an Ashes tour with me to watch the Rugby League Test Series. I've got some leaflets there with a QR code, so save your pennies, Scott, Darren and Phoenix. I know Zero Tackle pay you so well. Very, very good tour. Come to England with me. Come and meet all my family and friends. So
imagine that, weeks on end of listening to Lee drop puns. Oh, sign me up.
I'll be dropping some pints too, don't you worry about that.
Beautiful stuff. All right, thank you, fellas, and subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't already, and we'll catch you next week.